Chapter 9. Courts of Love. Though Eleanor and Henry were not formally separated, they no longer lived together and met only occasionally for business or family affairs. Henry, somewhat disgraced by the Becket affair, was by no means subdued. He had thought it wise to get away until the shock of Becket's murder blew over. He had gone far north to campaign in Ireland. Though he only conquered a small part of the island, he had sown the seeds of Irish hatred for the English that still exists today. In taking up her career of ruling Aquitaine, Eleanor was eager to have her son, Richard, recognized as her heir, the future Duke of Aquitaine. She wanted to impress upon her people that he, not King Henry, would be her co-ruler and that he, not Henry, would be the rightful heir after she died. She took Richard to the far corners of her duchy to show him off, and she had him crowned Duke of Aquitaine with as much ceremony as a royal coronation. Eleanor doted on this handsome, talented son, who in his early teens was already tall and powerfully built. He had his father's ruddy cheeks but darker auburn hair. Most talented and intelligent of her sons, he also had his mother's love of art, poetry, and music. Like Eleanor's troubadour grandfather, he composed music and verse. Eleanor at last had someone she could mold into her ideal knight, and she did more besides. She taught him the arts of statecraft. Though Eleanor had to be on the road much of the time, she made Poitiers her home base. This was no thick-walled fortress like most castles in England, with their draughty, smoke-filled rooms full of hunting hounds and littered rushes. This was an elegant castle fit for a queen. The sun poured into the great hall through the new arcaded windows all day long, and the adjacent tower had comfortable rooms with privacy for women. Eleanor had a huge household to cope with, and her castle swarmed with young people, knights, ladies-in-waiting, adolescents, and small children. There were her own handsome sons and beautiful daughters, her daughter-in-law, Marguerite, and future daughters-in-law, Constance of Brittany, engaged to young Geoffrey, and Lais of France, engaged to Richard, an arrangement he later rejected. Her 10-year-old Matilda had just gone off to Germany, where she would later marry the Duke of Saxony. Her namesake Eleanor would soon go to Spain to marry the King of Castile, and little Joanna was engaged to the future King of Sicily. Through this web of entangling alliances, Eleanor's and Henry's descendants would provide no end of kings and queens of Europe, as well as one German emperor and one saint. The only member of the family not yet provided for was baby John, who was therefore jokingly nicknamed John Lackland, a nickname he never learned to like. It was an odd assortment of young people, with children of Eleanor's two husbands, one divorced, the other estranged, mingling together along with their southern cousins and relatives. Besides this extended family, there came a steady stream of troubadours and entertainers glad to have their patroness back. From time to time, there also came high-born young men and women eager to join the gay social life in Poitiers. The aristocratic young Aquitanian knights, always an unruly lot, had been so long without a steady ruler, ever since Eleanor had left to be Queen of France 30 years before, that they were more out of control than ever. Crusades had been an outlet for their youthful energies, but in peacetime these footloose knights, especially the younger sons who had no titles or settled futures, became a menace. Jobless and restless, they roamed the land in search of trouble and daredevil adventure. There was, however, one substitute for war, that popular medieval sport, the tournament. Spring was the time for tournaments, as it was for fairs and religious festivals. From Easter until mid-June, the highways were jammed with knights and squires, horse dealers, armorers, and wandering minstrels, making the tournament circuit. Unlike later tournaments, where knights encased in plated armor jousted in single combat before grandstand audiences, tournaments in Eleanor's day were really mini-battles. At the blast of a herald's trumpet, the mail-clad knights astride their huge war horses leveled their lances and dashed pell-mell against opposing knights. When lances broke, swords were drawn to continue the battle. Fortunes were won and lost on these fields of battle, though the object was to capture, not kill, opponents. The victor won the horse and arms of his captive and could hold him for ransom. There were many cracked skulls, and many young knights lay dead on the field at the end of the day. Eleanor's oldest son, Prince Henry, had a passion for tournaments and adventure. He and his tutor in arms, William Marshal, the gallant knight errant, who had saved Eleanor from kidnappers, made the rounds of tournaments every spring. William had already won fame and made a considerable fortune through his jousting skills. He often gave his earnings to help bail the prince out of debt. The handsome, lovable prince was generous to the point of being a spendthrift. He was the ideal of the tournament crowd and always had a large following of wild, dissolute young knights, eager to cash in on his generosity and to follow him to tournaments or on other crazy escapades. Once, after a tournament, he thought it would be fun to invite all the young men with the name of his companion in arms, William, to a feast. 117 young Williams showed up, and he wined and dined them lavishly. His extravagance annoyed his father no end. He annoyed his mother, too, when he and his friends arrived at her castle straight from a tournament, streaked with blood and dirt and smelling of horses. Eleanor refused to let them in until they had washed and tidied up. It was not that Eleanor disapproved of tournaments. She didn't. She knew that they helped train warriors in courage and skill. She was proud of Richard, who had already passed one test in training for knighthood, being able to run fully clad in chain armor and leap onto a horse without using the stirrups. But prowess was only one knightly virtue she admired. She insisted on cleanliness and manners, too. Eleanor needed help to train and discipline these spirited young people, all under the age of 20. Strangely enough, the person who came to help her was her first child, Marie, born to her and Louis long ago. Perhaps Louis thought it wise to have Marie in Poitiers to check up on his young daughter, Marguerite, married to Prince Henry. Eleanor had not seen Marie for 18 years, and both rejoiced in the reunion. Now Countess of Champagne, Marie was in her late 20s and had 2 children of her own. Brought up in the strict schooling of Paris, she nonetheless blossomed under her mother's influence and soon warmed to the more lenient southern way of life. She responded, like her half-brother Richard, to the beauties of lyric poetry and music. She, Richard, and their mother had much in common and were always devoted to each other. Eleanor and Marie began to school the boisterous youth in courtly behavior, especially manners and respect for women. They devised a sort of parlor game based on the popular subject sung about by every troubadour, love. The name of the game was Courtly Love, its object to outlaw boorishness and to put women on a pedestal. It aimed to teach young men the art of making love in a refined and civilized way. Eleanor and Marie knew well enough that women in the real feudal world were still nothing but male property, but in Eleanor's court the real world was turned upside down into a dream world where men paid homage not to an overlord, but to some fair damsel. As the troubadour Bernard de Ventadour wrote, "Lady, I'm yours, and yours shall be, vowed to your service constantly. This is the oath of fealty I pledged to you this long time past. As my first joy was all in you, so shall my last be found there too, so long as life in me shall last." The game of courtly love was played out in mock trials in which Eleanor and her ladies, as jurors, handed down decisions on the behavior of a lover, using the legal methods the Queen had learned from Henry. The women, sometimes 60 strong, sat on the raised dais at the end of Eleanor's great hall while the young men gathered below. The men were well-groomed, some of them dressed in such finery that a northern monk complained of their showy cloaks with long flowing sleeves like women's, and, worst of all, of their affecting long hair and shoes with pointed toes. Before the court came to order, troubadours sang their love songs to the accompaniment of music. Minstrels recited tales of King Arthur and his knights. In a new popular romance written at the request of Countess Marie, the gallant knight Sir Lancelot underwent appalling ordeals in order to prove his love for Queen Guinevere. The audience must have gasped listening to the minstrel describe Lancelot crossing over the sword bridge, a single long blade cutting edge, into the mysterious land of Gur, where his beloved Guinevere was held captive. Later in the tale came a moment of almost unbearable suspense, when Queen Guinevere put the hero through a most humiliating test of his love for her. In the midst of a tournament, as Lancelot, the greatest and most courageous of King Arthur's knights, was winning victory after victory, he was suddenly ordered by the Queen to do his worst, to play the coward. Suspense mounted as Lancelot, humbly obeying his queen, retreated in fear, was unhorsed and laughed at for his cowardice. Only when the queen realized that Lancelot had proved his love for her and ordered him to be himself again and to do his best could the audience relax. Then they could applaud Lancelot's final unsurpassed victory as he mowed down one foe after another. The women were, of course, pleased that Queen Guinevere had shown such power over her lover. Another popular tale was the tragic romance of Tristan and the fair Isolde, which was sure to bring tears to all. Countess Marie had also requested a friend to write a guidebook on the art of making love, with rules for the behavior of a young lover toward his loved one, and to explain how true love improved and ennobled a man. Oh, what a noble thing is love, which makes a man shine with so many virtues, and teaches everyone so many good traits of character. This early how-to book also contained records of 21 cases on which the ladies passed judgment. When the court came to order, young lovers presented their problems or questions to the ladies on the dais. One particular case caused quite a stir. A young knight asked if there could be true love in marriage. After deliberation, Countess Marie handed down the decision that it was unlikely that true, pure love could exist in marriage, since marriage was a commercial contract which united fortunes and lands, not people in love. Marriage was based on obligation and a wife's obedience and prevented love from being given freely as ideal love ought to be. Eleanor, as the oldest and most experienced woman, was asked to add her opinion. Though she thought it would be admirable if one could find true love in marriage, she reluctantly agreed with the court's decision. She did not say out loud how disillusioned she had been in her own 2 marriages. The pure ideal love that Eleanor and her ladies longed for was not just the satisfaction of sexual lust, but something more precious and enduring, something more beautiful, a goal for which a lover must prove himself worthy through good behavior, loyalty, and respect for the woman he loved. Beyond the walls of Eleanor's castle, the real world went on much the same as it always had, with men continuing to treat women as the inferior sex. One husband got so angry at a troubadour singing ardent love songs to his wife that he had the young man's tongue cut out. And in spite of the growing cult of the Virgin Mary, the Church still considered most women a necessary evil, only useful for continuing the human race. But Eleanor and her ladies had the satisfaction of expressing something new and unconventional, a feminist revolt against male supremacy. In Eleanor's court, women were superior to men. They ruled supreme and, like goddesses, inspired young men to serve them and adore them. Though courtly love was largely romantic fantasy expressing what women wanted society to be, not what it really was, it had some influence. Eleanor and her ladies couldn't change the feudal world overnight, but the vogue of courtly love spread throughout aristocratic circles all over Europe, and with it was born the idea of a gentleman. Modern manners owe much to Eleanor's courts of love. We can thank her for the fact that ladies go first, that some men stand up when women enter a room. Eleanor would be pleased to know that the word obey is no longer required of a bride in a wedding ceremony, and that her ideal of romantic love, freely given by both man and woman, is now the ideal in marriage.